I made an attempt to quantify what exactly defines a player that the streets won't forget. And, as an added bonus, I'll be trying to predict which modern day footballers will be the ones who the roads will remember in 10 years' time. Just like we do now with Michu, Adel Taarabt and JJ Okocha. ChatGPT defines... I'm just kidding. I'm not that desperate. I'm a writer. You have at least a vague idea of what a player the streets won't forget is. And I'm not in the business of killing the planet for my YouTube intro that about 20 people will watch. So, how exactly do I go about making a framework to help identify these future legends of the pub table and the lads group chats? What separates a player that the streets won't forget from a simple, good old-fashioned cult hero in the Premier League? The first thing I did was to scour the internet for every player who I could find that was referred to as a player the streets won't forget on 2 or more separate independent occasions, and I eventually ended up with a list of over 120. I then went ahead and collected all of the relevant, widely available stats that I could think of for this group of players. As I was collecting this data and looking at my list of names, I could already tell there was a pretty big problem. Eden Hazard, one of the best wingers in the world for an extended period of time. Jermaine Defoe, literally the 9th highest scorer in Premier League history. Samir Nasri had 2 extended stints at England's most successful clubs since the turn of the millennium. The history books will remember these players. There's absolutely no need for the streets to do so. I guess that's what I get for trusting the wisdom of the crowd, and for trusting Reddit and TikTok among other sources. This list was as trustworthy as a rope bridge made out of al dente pasta. Still, I found a way to make use of some of my data collection. I decided to go through the list again, and narrow it down to those who appeared in a very scientific cutoff point of most of the discussions. I could then go through the stats of this surefire bunch, compare it to the rest of the league, and to those who don't quite feel right, and then hopefully I'd be able to find some more solid identifiers than simply vibes. So I marked out a nice, neat list of 23 surefire players, ordered roughly by how slam dunk I thought the label was for that player. So we have Adel Taarabt and Michu at the top, and Benjani is scraping in as the 23rd and final discordant football certified player that the streets won't forget. Our first graph also comes with our first problem, and that's the Irishman with the long throw. It's Rory Delap. This is a simple graph of the amount of seasons that each player had in the Premier League, and down here ruining the nice gradual curve is Big Rory. Rory sticks out in a lot of the data, and I'm going to put that down to one simple factor. He's a gimmick. If Rory Delap didn't have that throw, he would never be on these lists. It doesn't make him invalid, he just illuminates a separate path taken to street remembrance, especially when compared to most of the others on this list. If we get a goalkeeper who takes free kicks in the Premier League, or another similarly memorable gimmick, then they too will probably be remembered. Anyway, back to the graph. I decided to refine it a little bit by making it seasons with 15 or more appearances. With this criteria, we can see that 18 of the 23 played between 2 and 6 seasons of 15 games or more. Nothing groundbreaking, but something interesting to keep in mind. This graph of the amount of games played portrays essentially the same information with a slightly different flavour, like some vanilla ice cream, left lonely in the Neapolitan tub with only the ghosts of chocolate and strawberry haunting the sides of the container. Next up, I charted the finishing position for each season that a player spent in the league. Here is where you can start to see interesting data come through, I think. First, the most obvious fact is that none of these players have ever won the league. I don't think necessarily that winning the league would immediately exclude you from being labelled as a player that the streets won't forget, but I do think that playing an integral part in a title win, or winning multiple titles, would pretty much eliminate you from contention. I'm sure they'll be devastated to hear that, but you can't have it all in your career. There's a definite bias towards players who are mid-table, the mean, mode and median. Look at me remembering my stats classes, all backing that up. Most of the higher finishes came from those who are on the fringes of my selections, Andrei Arshavin, for example, contributed 2 third-place finishes along with a 4th place. But if they're on the list, then they count. The main takeaway I had from this, from my own selections, is to look for mainly mid-table finishes. But I won't be scared off by a couple of top 4 appearances. This graph can similarly be coupled with the players' win percentages in the Premier League. I wasn't expecting it to do so, but charting the nationalities of the selected players did come with some interesting takeaways. The first thing that stood out was that there was not a single English player on the list. Indeed, the great outlier Rory Delap is the only representative from either Ireland or the UK on the list. I have a couple of theories about why this could be. Theory number 1. For a long time, English football was defined by a lack of flair. Good, sensible 4-4-2 football is antithetical to the type of football which makes one whom the streets will remember. If this is the case, then we could expect this trend to fade away, as England in general have now transitioned to a more technical style of football in recent years. Theory 2 is that a player being English or British makes them far more likely to stay in England, and therefore have a long enough career to make either enough of an impact to rise above the label, or alternatively to stay long enough to ruin their reputation in that regard. An example I could think of for this is Jack Grealish at Aston Villa is absolutely someone who could have been labelled as one the streets won't forget. But then he moved to Man City, and this led to him both winning the league at City, raising his reputation, and therefore becoming slightly too noteworthy, while also sort of diminishing his freedom to impact games and his natural flair, therefore taking away from the sort of skill element that comes with the tag. If he was called Grealishio and he was Brazilian and he moved to somewhere like Inter Milan instead of Man City, then we could easily be looking at him as a Juninho-esque Premier League icon. However, if this theory is true, it is seemingly becoming more common for English players to play abroad. So this could lead to an English player being viewed as one the streets won't forget in the future. Alternatively, it could simply be the fact that someone who is English can never be remembered by the streets, doomed to wander unnamed. The simple stench of pie and mash can never be washed away. The public and the streets could never be tricked into committing valuable brain space towards remembering the name of a filthy Englishman. My personal take is that it's probably possible for an English player to be one who the streets won't forget, but they need to have a slightly unusual career path for an English player. The closest I can currently reach in my mind is someone like Tammy Abraham. I was going to say Elise, but I have to count Miss French, I guess. But someone like Tammy Abraham starting their career strong before making a move abroad to a team who are able to hold on to him. Alternatively, if you're English and you can emulate Rory Delap and find a long throw or other suitable gimmick, you might be able to cement yourself in history that way. Outside of the English predicament, Europe was the most represented continent, having 11 of the 23 players. This was led by a very strong French contingent. There were also a good number of African players in the list, making up 7 of the 23. It was slightly surprising to me that this outnumbered the amount of South Americans present, but ultimately the question of English identity was the main takeaway from this segment. But hey, at least I made these ugly graphs. The goals and assists per game stat, when coupled with the positions of these players, paints a clear picture of the type of player who is more likely to be remembered by the streets. Once you get past the great outlier in Rory Delap and his 2 midfield friends, and the 1 lone goalkeeper on the list, Wigan legend Ali Al-Habsi, then the goals and assists per game shoots right up. Every other player on this list is either an attacking midfielder, winger or centre forward. It's what most casual fans will pay attention to, and when picking a player that the streets won't forget, there's a strong bias towards attack-minded players. It's part of my unprovable theory that a good defensive player at a mid-table club is more likely to be remembered as a cult hero. Unable to make their names on the streets, they are instead bewilderingly made to be heroes of flawed, controlling, religious or other social groups. And so, Another clear, if unsurprising takeaway is that you're much more likely to make my list if you play in the final third. Alternatively, if you play further back, you should probably either possess a gimmick, such as Rory Delap, or extreme flair and skill relative to the position you play, such as Moussa Dembele. Finally, something which stood out to me, but which is surprisingly hard to find concrete statistics on, was how many of these players are very good free kick takers. It makes sense in a way, with free kicks being very memorable pieces of play in contrast to their overall impact. However, there's no easily accessible, widely available, free data that I can find for direct free kick goals. The players that I highlighted here in red are those who I would consider as being free kick specialists, and the ones in orange are free kick threats, and the rest are, well, the rest. 12 out of 23 is a very high proportion, and something which I can factor strongly into our search. If a player is skilled at finding the back of the net from a set piece, it's a great boost to their candidacy. This leads into the first of my 4 predictions for a player who could, in the future, be someone we look back on as someone the streets won't forget, which is an incredibly confusing sentence to write. Fulfilling this free kick taking criteria, and perhaps a little bit of the Roy Delap gimmick, is James Ward-Prowse. I realise that sounds a little bit harsh to James Ward-Prowse, but the fact remains that in general, a mid-table, solid and serviceable central midfielder would not normally come close to this tag. I hate to break it to you, but Leon Osman is not getting any shouts. The biggest argument against Ward-Prowse would be the length of his career in the Premier League, combined with his nationality. However, he has spent his time finishing in the perfect league positions, with the perfect clubs, throughout his time in the league to be considered. Throw that in with his gimmick of being able to score a lot of direct free kicks. He's second only to David Beckham in total Premier League free kick goals, and I think it could be a decent shout. It's possible that he's going to be around the league for just a little bit too long to be considered, but I thought he was an interesting first candidate to test the limits of who could be considered and to poke and prod at your own personal qualifiers for this term. Next up, I went with a much more traditional choice. He's not British, 2 seasons in the Premier League, an attacking winger with skill and flair. Rafinha was a standout player for Leeds for a couple of seasons before making a big move away to Barcelona. This, combined with his age, means he's a lot less likely to feature significantly for a top Premier League team again. His finishing positions in the league of 9th and 17th stick him squarely in our ideal range. He scored a free kick in each of his seasons in the Premier League. There's not really anything I can see which would disqualify Rafinha from contention. The only real point I could see you making is that an extended successful stint at Barcelona could make him sort of too notable to be considered for the role, but I think that would involve pretty much having to win the Champions League or be a major contributor in some way. Brighton's Mitoma is an interesting potential pick. His style of play, with aggressive dribbling, suits the tag well. In addition, Brighton is the perfect level of club for me to pull a player from. Shockingly, with a name like that, he is also not British. My main concern with him is that he's never necessarily been a talismanic figure for a Brighton team, which is always packed with interesting talents and technically gifted players. This is emblematic of a common thought I had while scouring squad lists. There are a lot more of these types of players in the league now. A player who would have really stood out in an old Bolton or Middlesbrough team is now one of 2 or 3 or 4 similar players on a team at any point. It really is an eye-opening way of looking at how much football has changed in the last 20 or so years. Finally, Alain Saint-Maximin. You already know it's true, it's too easy, and I'm not going to waste my time or your time explaining that choice. So thank you for joining me on this way too deep dive into this label, which I'm sick of saying at this point. Before I started this, I'd have defined it as a player who was memorable and exciting, but never quite elite. And honestly, after all of this, my definition wouldn't really have changed that much. But I hope I'm not alone in being a complete weirdo who loves pushing at the edges and boundaries of these terms we use when we're watching sport, considering the differences and similarities between the terms like a club legend, icon, cult hero, underrated, and of course one who the streets won't forget was a lot of fun for me, and I've got a couple of similar ideas on the way and in the works. But if you have any suggestions of football related nonsense for me to dive into, then please do let me know, and I'll see you next time.